In the wake of the election, one of the things that I've been cautiously paying attention to is what all those MAGA televangelists have been saying about the election. Like, is it God's divine gift that Trump won? How is God going to punish those of us who didn't support him? And I heard a very interesting response to that from Kenneth Copeland, the scamvangelist, and arguably the richest televangelist in the country, whose estimated net worth is way too much. But I want to show you a clip of what he said just days after the election occurred, because he had a specific threat to people who did not vote for Donald Trump. And I will let him explain what that is.
I saw this in the spirit, literally, Judgment Day. And Jesus stood there and he said, those of you that didn't vote, I put you in that nation and you didn't vote. So you will hear, or you didn't pray and vote like I told you to. You will listen to the names of all the babies that are here and never got any life. And it'll take a while because there's over 65 million of them. But you are going to listen to every one of them, and you are going to be held responsible for their death.
Yes. So the punishment, the eternal punishment for those of us who didn't support Donald Trump, is that we have to, I guess, go somewhere and listen to the names of every aborted fetus that ever lived. By the way, I should tell you that after that clip, Kenneth Copeland also celebrated what he called like an impending spiritual awakening. Or maybe he said that right before that clip. He said there would be no more rainbow flags with Trump back in office, and that the spirit of Margaret Sanger is gone too. But I just want to go back to this idea of what he thinks the afterlife is going to be for those of us who didn't support Donald Trump, because none of that makes any sense. For example, I'm curious if Trump-loving Christians have to spend eternity listening to the names of the women who have died because of the Republican Party's abortion bans. Because we are seeing story after story about women who had preventable problems. If a doctor was able to perform on them, they would have been saved, but they weren't because they lived in a red state that didn't allow doctors to do what they needed to do. What about the names of the increased number of aborted fetuses that they were personally responsible for because of their cruel, careless policies? Because, yeah, in red states, under Republican presidencies anyway, I should say, yeah, under Republican presidents, abortion rates tend to go up because it's harder to get contraception. It's harder to get birth control of any kind. And you could see charts everywhere. Abortions go down when Democrats are in office. So what? Do the increase in abortions, do Republicans have to listen to those? I don't know. I'm also curious if Christians in the afterlife, according to Kenneth Copeland, do they have to listen to the names of all the LGBTQ people who took their own lives as a result of faith-based bullying? Or do those lives not matter to them? You know, I'm also curious how they can weep over victims of abortion while celebrating the end of rainbow flags, because it brought to my mind the quotation from the late George Carlin, who said of gay people, they're against abortion. I'm sorry, he said this of the Christian right, they're against abortion and they're against gay people. Well, who has fewer abortions than gay people? Also, who's naming zygotes? I didn't know they all had names, because I'm pretty sure not all the mothers gave them names. I would assume most women having the procedure never got around to that stage of pregnancy, since they were not planning on having the child anyway. And if the baby did have a name, I promise you the mother almost certainly did not want to have an abortion, but maybe she needed to for medical reasons. So this idea that all 65 million, which by the way is a number he pulled out of his ass, all of those fetuses have names is ludicrous. No one's naming them. How quickly are we saying the names? I swear I spent way too much time thinking about this one. Are you listening to this list at like 1.75 speed, which is the way I listen to podcasts and watch Netflix? Or are you doing it like at a slow, meandering pace? Are they doing it in like a song? Who's the narrator? I think that matters too. I'm also curious if I'm reciting the names of aborted fetuses, then that means the people who are making me do that are in the same afterlife that I'm in. So I would assume Kenneth Copeland thinks I'm going to hell. Does that mean the people forcing me to say these names are also in hell? Or are we all in heaven next to the aborted fetuses? Because I assume they're going to heaven, right? Like, given that Christians often say those fetuses end up in heaven, then maybe I need to be there to know whose names I'm reciting. I don't know. If that's true, then heaven seems very boring. I'm trying to follow the logic here. Doesn't make much sense. And if all of us are in heaven, then where the hell is Kenneth Copeland and his buddies? I don't know. If I have to listen to this list of 65 million names, does that mean I do not have to listen to Kenneth Copeland? Because I would have to seriously consider that trade off. That sounds like a fair trade. I mean, he's way worse. And finally, even if there were 65 million names, why would that matter in eternity? Eternity is by definition long. Reading 65 million names may sound like a long time for us, but that's the blink of an eye relative to eternity. So that doesn't really sound like a punishment. I guess I'm just saying, I don't think he's thought this through. And then we get into miscarriages and all that. Like, do miscarriages get names? Because there's a hell of a lot of those. God's responsible for that if you want to follow what Copeland believes. I don't know. Listening to a Christian tell me what I should be worried about in the afterlife is like threatening a vegan with spoiled meat. I don't know why people like me are supposed to care. I'm sure it makes him feel better, but I got to tell you, I'm not really worried about it. It's not going to affect me. And if you're wondering who's even taking him seriously, well, let me remind you that about half the voters in the country voted for Donald Trump. So listen, we're not a country full of very intelligent people. This is the same Kenneth Copeland who insisted that his prayers defeated COVID in March of 2020. All right. He's a professional bullshit artist who is only taken seriously by the most gullible Christians in the country. And unfortunately, these are the same people who are now in charge of the government, and they have every desire to seek vengeance against their ideological and theological enemies. So don't underestimate what they can do. They can do a lot of damage. They can make our lives really miserable. But of all the ways they can make my life miserable, making me say 65 million names isn't one of the things on that list. I don't know. I guess I'm very curious if Kenneth Copeland has to worry about eternity, if he's ever spent much time thinking about eternity. He's 87 years old, but he has said in multiple speeches that God told him he's going to live to the age of 120. So I don't know. Maybe he's not even thinking about what's going to happen in the afterlife. But I don't know. I'm very curious what you all think about that punishment for him. Maybe we can get some comments about that. But that's all I wanted to share. I wonder. I hope that doesn't keep you up late at night. But there you go. That's what you're all doing in the afterlife. What questions do we have here before I move on to the next story? I thought up an all-star roundup. Ooh, the thinking atheist, the friendly atheist, and the daily atheist, all in one stream. I don't know if I know the daily atheist. I know Seth, the thinking atheist, fairly well, but there are so many good creators on YouTube that I really enjoy watching. And I hope you're all subscribed to your favorite ones. If we have too many abortions, then Republicans can't have school shootings. I know. It would be so disappointing to them not to have more victims available for gun violence. I mean, really, we have abortions for their sake. I think that's just math. What else we got here? Isn't Copeland the guy with 5 private planes in his backyard? Kenneth Copeland does have at least a few private jets to his name. I've listened to way too many of his lectures, his sermons at his various events. This guy does not stop talking about how much he loves flying private planes. Like when Trump goes on tangents during his rallies to talk about the dumbest things, Copeland's version of that is talking about back in the day, the old stories of when he was flying a plane. So the guy has multiple private jets. If he doesn't have like 5, he can absolutely afford that many because all he does is go from one city to the next to grift a little more. Actually, if you consider the doctrine of original sin, isn't abortion a favor to the unborn? This has come up many times because if a fetus is aborted, well, they haven't had a chance to get to know Jesus, and you can't punish them for not knowing Jesus. Therefore, they don't have a chance to reject Jesus. So you can't punish them for that. So you just assume they go to heaven. So if you have an abortion, you're really helping the fetus have a great afterlife. And yet, all these Christians, conservative Christians, do not spend a lot of time thanking women who have abortions for the sacrifice they are making for their children. I don't know. If you're trying to find logic in anti-abortion arguments, you're not going to find much. I'm not reading all this out, but 15,666 unborn fetuses. I was imagining more like 99 bottles of beer on the wall. Like you start with 65 million and work your way down, because that would seem a little more excruciating than counting up. How many viewers, listeners until I sing? Oh, dear God. I'm going to spare you. I was in all my high school musicals, but I am not going to sing for you. Love every time my podcast co-host Jessica sings. Don't encourage that. I'm not going to do that for you.